Hi everyone, I'm Andre. Welcome to Bringing Brookfield Zoo to you. What has bumpy skin, hops a lot, and eats bugs? Well, let's hop over to the Living Coast and visit our animal care team as they take us behind the scenes with the Puerto Rican crested toad.
And today we're really excited to showcase an animal that isn't actually on exhibit at the zoo, but one that we work with in the back, the Puerto Rican crested toad. So this is an SSP animal, a species survival plan. So the AZA, which we are a member of, formulates these species survival plans to help protect and conserve animals. So the Puerto Rican crested toad is a critically endangered toad that lives in, obviously, Puerto Rico, and it is the only native toad to Puerto Rico, although there are some invasive toads that live there. That is part of the reason that they are endangered. And they live in two places in Puerto Rico. Most of them live in the dry forests of Guanica and Quebradillas, and there's expected to be about 1,000, maybe a few more left in the wild. But what the SSP does, they organize a group of zoos and aquariums to breed these toads, and then we release the tadpoles to the wild. Since the formation of the SSP, over 500,000 tadpoles have been released into their historic range. Brookfield Zoo has been participating since 2016, and we've released 12,323 tadpoles since that time. And last year was our most successful year, and we released 6,024 tadpoles back to some farms that are some pools that are managed in Puerto Rico. So we can do a feed. So here we have 5 adult toads in this aquarium here. There's 4 females and 1 male. They are sexually dimorphic, which means you can tell the males and females apart. So they're sexually dichromatic, so the male is the one that's sitting up front, and you can see he's a little bit more brightly colored than the females with a little bit more of a yellow tinge. And then if you also notice, the male is about half the size of the female. So in the wild, they're insect eaters, so we give them live insects here at the zoo. So we have some crickets for them to eat. You can see there's some powder in there. That's a vitamin and mineral powder that we will kind of dust the crickets with to make sure that the toads are getting all their vitamins. So.
Can these guys swim like frogs?
They're not as good a swimmer as frogs, so frogs and toads are both in the class Anura, so they're closely related, but frogs tend to have webbed feet and be a little bit better in the water. But they definitely breed in small vernal pools, temporary pools in Puerto Rico, so they can swim a little bit, and they mostly will sit along the edges of pools and call to their mates. We actually have a recording of their call, so if you want to take a listen, I'll play Puerto Rican crested toad mating call. So in the wild, they'll breed during the rainy season, but here at the zoo, the SSP coordinator will sort of let us know when they would like to do the release based on when they have people to man the pools. So we participated last October, and then we will also do a round of breeding this coming October. So hopefully we can beat our record of just over 6,000 in this next round of breeding.
How many eggs can they lay at once?
They can lay many thousands of eggs. Again, the 6,000 we had was from 2 pairings, so that's roughly 3,000 per animal, but it can vary, and not every egg is going to be fertile. So.
Can they smell?
They have a limited sense of smell. Mostly they're visual predators, so they'll see something moving that they might want to eat, and they'll jump over and grab their prey item.
What are these called again? Can you remind me?
These are Puerto Rican crested toads. And while there's a lot of frog species in Puerto Rico, this is the only native toad species.
Are they going to react to the recording that you just played?
It seems like they didn't. I think sometimes you don't want to overdo it and play too much, especially when they've been conditioned. So they go through kind of a resting period in the wild where there's the drier period, and they don't hibernate, but they'll estivate, so they'll kind of not eat and relax for a while, and we have to mimic that here before we breed them by chilling them down. They typically are at about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and we chill them down to about 60, and we end up feeding them less, and that kind of conditions them to breed once we bring them back up to tropical summer temperatures.
Why are Puerto Rican crested toads endangered?
A large part of the problem is development, so if you kind of take over the places that they used to live and breed, it makes it harder for them to exist. They also are affected by invasive species, so they're competing now with animals like the cane toad, which is an invasive toad. It's been a problem in a few different places.
How long do they live?
I think they can probably live about 10 to 20 years. They're pretty long-lived animals.
Are they usually this active?
They're a little more active now just because we just threw some crickets in. They actually sleep for a large percentage of the day, which is part of the reason that they're not the best exhibit animals. Mostly they'd just be sleeping. They're fossorial animals, which means they like to kind of dig and burrow into the rockwork and into the soil and kind of just hang out there. So they're not the best exhibit animals, but we're glad we can show them to you here on Facebook Live.
Why are they bumpy?
A toad's warts actually produce toxins that help protect them from predators. So if someone tried to eat them, they can release toxins, and that might help protect them depending on what animal's trying to eat them.
Somebody noticed the toe tapping. What do they do that for?
Yeah, I don't actually know, but it seems like when toads and frogs get excited, they'll do that. Particularly when you're about to feed them, they'll tap their toes. I think it might be to help distract their prey items while they jump over and grab them.
What are their predators?
Any mammal that can kind of grab them would be a predator. When they're small, bigger frogs and toads might eat them. So pretty much anything that can grab them and swallow them would be a potential predator. Birds as well.
So are they poisonous?
So these are the toads that we have raised here at the zoo. These are the ones that were tadpoles in October of last year. So in addition to the 6,000 that we sent out, we keep a number of them here to be part of the breeding population. So these guys will be the next generation of toads here at the zoo that we'll be raising to eventually release as well.
How big do they get?
So you saw some of the adults. The males, again, are a little bit smaller than the females, so they can be about 40-ish grams, maybe a little bit bigger. Females can be roughly 120 grams, so 3 to 5 inches or so.
What do they eat besides crickets?
So they can eat any kind of small invertebrates. We can give them mealworms, hornworms, waxworms, a variety of things. But crickets seem to be a favorite, but we can kind of mix up the diet with some of those others.
So you talked a little bit about it. What are the differences between frogs and toads?
Sure. So they're all kind of closely related. They're in the same class, but toads tend to be animals that are drier and wartier and don't live in as close an association with water. Most frogs and toads do lay eggs in water, though not all of them do. So most of them are pretty intimately connected to water and aquatic ecosystems.
How old is the oldest toad that we have?
I'd actually have to check that. I think they're probably around 10.
So where do they live at the zoo, since they're not viewable for the public?
So they live in a separate room at the Living Coast, sort of behind the scenes. So I think people think that what they see at the zoo is all that we do, but we actually have a number of really cool projects like this Puerto Rican crested toad breeding project behind the scenes.
Do they have names?
We don't tend to name them just because we have a large group. So if you have suggestions, we'll take a look back and see.
Can they be trained?
Certainly any animal that is food motivated can be trained. So if there were behaviors that we thought were important for their well-being, we could train it, but they're pretty easy to handle, so we don't tend to spend too much time on training for these guys.
What do they feel like?
Sort of dry. They're cold-blooded, so they're not warm or anything. They'll be the temperature of their environment, and they're just sort of dry, a little bit lumpy, I suppose.
So we saw with the adults that they're sexually dimorphic. Can you tell the difference between males and females when they're this young?
Not really, although you can see some of them are growing at an uneven rate, so it might be that the larger ones are females and the ones that are growing a little more slowly are males.
What do they do for fun?
They're pretty lazy, so they do love to sleep and nap for fun, I suppose. I don't know if we'd call it fun, but a large portion of their day is actually spent resting and sleeping and waiting for their next meal.
What are the stages from egg to toad?
Sure, so they'll start as eggs, which the female will lay several thousand, and they're in kind of long strands, and then they'll hatch into tadpoles. The eggs hatch in 24 hours. They're a tropical toad, kept in warm water, and they tend to develop very quickly. So they'll hatch into tadpoles. The tadpoles will exist for just a couple of weeks before they metamorphose into small toads, which look exactly like the adults, but they're very tiny, and I guess that makes them a little cuter, I suppose. And then they'll just continue to grow from there. Then after a few years, they'll be ready to breed.
What senses do they use to hunt?
They're mostly visual predators, so they'll see the insects and invertebrates that they want to eat moving around and jump after those things.
How fast can they hop?
You're pretty much seeing it here. I don't know if we've ever clocked them, but they sort of are pretty quick moving when they see some crickets and things that they want to eat. Otherwise, they're, I don't know, they're pretty still and lazy, I suppose you'd even say.
What are they doing with that movement underneath their mouths?
So that's just how they breathe. It's also, when they eventually get older, the males will call to females. So they'll breathe in air to their lungs, hold their nostrils shut, and then move air between their pouch and their lungs. And as they move the air back and forth, they'll be able to make those calls that we heard.
Do they sleep on top of each other?
They do, actually. They tend to like to congregate. I don't know if it's that they're not necessarily social, but I think they all like to be in the best spots. So we put up a couple pieces of wood here as they were in these enclosures. As they were going to go to sleep, they'd probably all congregate under there. I think they just like to be in the best spots.
Do they have sticky feet?
They do not. They're not like tree frogs, although they're semi-accomplished climbers. I know one of them was trying to make its way out of the aquarium that we have it in here. So they don't have sticky feet, and they're not really known to be climbing animals like the tree frogs, but they can climb a little bit. All right, well, we're wrapping this up here. Thanks again for joining us here at this Bringing the Zoo to You. We'll hope to see you soon.
Have you ever wondered what types of toads and frogs we have here in Illinois? Well, let's leap over to the Play Zoo and see what Jenny's up to.
Hello, Play Zoo friends. My name is Jenny. Thanks for joining us for the Hamill Family Play Zoo video series, Bringing the Play Zoo to You. Today, we will learn all about our local frogs and toads and celebrate them with some froggy fun. Let's go! There are about 23 different species of frogs and toads in Illinois. Frogs and toads can live in streams, ponds and rivers, in forests and marshes, and in fields and grasslands. All frogs and toads are amphibians because they have a very thin skin that needs to stay moist. Grown-up frogs and toads in Illinois mostly eat insects like mosquitoes, flies, and mites, which they catch with their long, sticky tongue. And all frogs and toads have strong hind legs, which make them excellent jumpers. When we go outside to look for frogs and toads, they might be hard to see because they are excellent hiders. To find frogs and toads, we have to use our ears. Springtime in Illinois is a great time to listen for the sounds of frogs and toads calling to one another. Each species of frog and toad makes a different sound, and you can tell them apart by the sounds they make. Green frogs spend most of their time in the water. They make a twang sound, like the sound of a rubber band. Let's try to make a sound like a green frog. The American bullfrog is the largest frog in Illinois. The bullfrog's call sounds like a cow mooing. Let's try to make a sound like a bullfrog. Moo, moo. The western chorus frog lives in fields near towns and cities. It makes a preep sound, similar to the sound we can make on a plastic comb. Let's try. The American toad makes a trilling sound. You might spot American toads here at Brookfield Zoo around Swan Lake. Young toads are very small, about the size of a quarter, so watch where you step. You can try to make a sound like an American toad by making our lips vibrate like this. There are so many frogs and toads that make unique sounds. The next time you go for a spring or summer walk, listen closely and see which frogs and toads you can find with your ears. That was fun. Now, before we go, let's have a frog jumping contest. Remember, frogs and toads are super jumpers. They use their strong hind legs to jump up to 10 times the length of their bodies. Let's see how far we can jump like a frog or a toad does. See you next time.
Frogs and toads are pretty fascinating. And did you know that they sing? If you take a trip to one of our forest preserves of Cook County, you may be lucky enough to hear their songs. Well, thanks for joining us. Look forward to seeing you next time on Bringing Brookfield Zoo to You.